I have a New Year's resolution to be more bold in my takes and assertions about BYU. So let's start 2025 on this note. The BYU football program exiting the 2024 football season, looking ahead to 2025, they are the best team in the Big 12 Conference.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Please continue to subscribe, rate, review the show, like the show, comment, let us know what you guys think of the podcast. All the interaction is much appreciated and helps us be the best version of ourselves that we can become in 2025 and beyond. All right, let's get right to it. And you heard me say it. BYU, in my opinion, is the best team in the Big 12 Conference right now, exiting the 2024 football season and now turning our attention to a long offseason ahead of the 2025 campaign. Well, why is that? Well, think about it. Arizona State was where everybody in the Big 12 Conference hoped to be at the end of the year, and that was in the college football playoff. Yes, a tough loss for the ASU Sun Devils, and mad props to them after they battled to the absolute bitter end against the Texas Longhorns and showed that the Big 12 can hang with the big bad SEC. But as you look ahead, Cam Skattebo exits that football program. He was the heart and soul of ASU. I know that they have their quarterback back in Sam Levitt. I know they have guys like Jordan Tyson expected to return as well. I know the Arizona State fans are going to be upset with me saying this, but think about the circumstances BYU finds itself in. It has nearly all of its weapons back in 2025. Jake Retzloff, LJ Martin in the backfield. You have Chase Roberts running it back. We are obviously awaiting word on if Darius Lassiter is going to run it back for another season or not. But regardless, outside of Darius Lassiter, BYU essentially has every weapon back and in many respects has upgraded different positions, particularly at tight end. There's a lot of people who think that Carson Ryan could be a major upgrade for BYU overall at the tight end position. Defensively, you have star linebackers like Isaiah Glasker back. You have your star safeties back as well, Raider Demooney and Tanner Wall. There's a ton of pieces that BYU has returning in 2025. And when you add a defensive tackle the caliber of Keanu Tanuvasa, you had high-level pass rushers on the perimeter, it sure looks like BYU should be the highest-ranked team going into the 2025 football season. Now, preseason polls are finicky because we always see teams that just get the benefit of the doubt from these preseason pollsters that the SEC and the Big Ten, they'll throw their weight around in that regard. But BYU also has the best vibes coming out of the 2024 football season as well. And that comes on the backs of BYU playing their highest rated game in program history, at least in the modern era of college sports, with 8 million people tuning in. And I know that 8 million may not sound all that impressive to you, but is an absolutely gargantuan TV number in this day and age. It is the highest rated CFP or non-playoff game in all bowl games since at least 2020. And now what is the modern era? I would consider the modern era to be 1984. Was it 84 when that Supreme Court ruling came down that essentially untethered all college and professional sports rights and allowed the proliferation of TV games all over the place? Ever since that time, that's what I consider the modern era of college sports. And BYU put on a performance for the ages against one of the biggest backdrops in all of college sports. The Alamo Bowl outdid the Big 12 actual championship game by a wide margin with those 8 million viewers. And the vast majority of those viewers were tuning in ostensibly to watch Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, Shedeur Sanders, and the Heisman Trophy winner Travis Hunter take it to BYU. And what did they get treated to? Oh, wait, the complete opposite. BYU ran amok and absolutely dominated the Colorado Buffaloes in that game. That is going to stick in the mind of preseason pollsters all offseason long. We've got 240-ish days until the next season kicks off. Probably 210, 215 until those preseason polls come out. And I will venture right now to say that based on what I perceive to be the Big 12's perception across the country, BYU is going to be the highest rated team, or ranked team, I should say, in those preseason polls. And accompanying that is going to be a whole lot of pressure on BYU to make a run at the Big 12 title and obviously the college football playoff next year. The topsy-turvy nature of the Big 12 conference will also have some people saying, okay, which of these teams is going to fall from first to worst? Well, that's a big argument to be had because we just saw Oklahoma State quite literally go from finishing second in last year's Big 12 race to going to the bottom, the clear bottom of the Big 12 with an 0-9 conference record. So yes, there is going to be pressure on BYU not to have that happen to them. There is going to be teams, Arizona State, Iowa State, Colorado, their fan bases are going to be upset that I make this argument. But really, consider what all those other teams don't have in their arsenal. I think maybe the closest of the bunch in terms of having weapons returning is probably Iowa State. Can you really argue that the vibes, the returning production, more importantly, the whole thought process about what BYU accomplished or what they didn't accomplish? Because trust me, immediately after BYU beat Colorado, and more importantly, as we watch teams like Arizona State fall in the college football playoff, there have been more and more cries from talking heads, social media, all kinds of different people out there saying that why didn't BYU get more love when it came to the college football playoff? Guys like John Wilner, and trust me, any of you who know who John Wilner is, he writes for the San Jose Mercury News out there, and he wrote the Pac-12 Hotline was the major thing that he wrote for a very, very long time until the demise of the conference. This is a guy who loved nothing more than to needle BYU fans, and he was arguing that BYU's resume got denigrated and torn down to a level that it shouldn't have been. It's absolutely incredible to watch where BYU is at in the hearts and minds of college football fans, both media and just the lay fan themselves right now, entering what is going to be a long offseason. But man, can you make any other argument than BYU being the top dog in the conference right now if you want to do power ratings or the like? I don't think you can. And more importantly, I think BYU, the Cougars themselves, they're more than happy to shoulder that. They know what they accomplished this year. There's a whole lot of people out there who thought they arrived ahead of schedule, and great. They will take all of it. And the best part about a guy like Kalani Sitake is he's going to try and keep it in as big a context as possible and make sure to preach to his guys, stay humble, stay hungry. But as always, if they don't know, let's go out and show them what they're about to find out. I think I absolutely butchered that quote coming out of that Utah game. But more importantly, this is a team that I think understands what it has at stake for it. Yes, they fell short of their stated goal of making the college football playoff this past year. But with everything that they have returning, and in fact, with some of the additions via the transfer portal they have added, there's a big argument to be had that BYU will be even better in 2025. And they were oh so close to beating Arizona State and Kansas and punching their own ticket to the playoff. Why can't they make that run again in 2025 and make even more noise potentially by actually going out and winning a game in the college football playoff? That's where things stand right now for BYU. So if you want to argue with me, I welcome any and all feedback. But I really, right now, based on everything I'm hearing, reading, and feeling about BYU, they are clearly top dog in the conference going into 2025. We'll see if that changes with transfer portal, with all kinds of different things that are still to come. But I don't think you can argue right now that any other team is more worthy of being the top-rated team in the Big 12 Conference than the BYU Cougars. And if you want to argue with me, go argue with a chair. All right, I'm joking about that. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review, and let us know your feedback. And hey, if you're hate watching this, thank you for tuning in all the same. Coming up next, we're going to talk more about the new year for BYU. It's 2025. What did we learn about BYU in 2024 that they can use as they push forward into 2025? And that includes more than just BYU football. I'm including BYU basketball and essentially the rest of BYU athletics in this discussion. And we'll delve into that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are upon us, my friends, but it's not too late to get in on the final week of regular season action. Then with our friends over at FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. It's as simple as that. The best part is FanDuel has a myriad of ways for you guys to pick up a W. All of us like to bet in our own way. Some of you may like to just go on money line. You can pick the better team to win. Guess what? You can win money that way. Spreads, player props, no matter what you're into, you can go out there and do it with our friends at FanDuel. And the best part is the app is super simple and easy to use. And you can see all the intel they've got, play-by-play, stats, all on the same page where you're placing your bets. So you're not feeling like you're in the dark. when you place that final bet and push the wager button with our friends over at FanDuel. So take advantage once again today and get up to $250 in bonus bets then with our friends over at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com. Make every moment more with our friends at FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Happy New Year to you all. Hope you have a fantastic start to your 2025 out there, wherever you might be. Let's talk about the state of BYU athletics going into this year. Now, the biggest thing for BYU is that they come off of 2024. Let's be honest, was a pretty monumental season, or year, I should say, for BYU athletics. Remember, we had BYU basketball finish a surprising 5th place, speaking of men's basketball, in the Big 12 when they were picked 13th out of 14 teams in the preseason poll going into last year. Mark Pope parlayed that into taking a job at Kentucky, and I think for a few days there, a lot of us were wondering, okay, what's the future of BYU basketball hold? Well, the future of BYU basketball, as we look back on it now, was explosive. Kevin Young gets hired and starts just an absolute revolution of how BYU is kind of portraying itself and what it's perceived to be in the greater college basketball community. This is a program that had never signed a top-rated prospect, and they've already done that in the 8 months and change since Kevin Young took over as BYU men's basketball coach. He has made a major impact for BYU athletics. And it's not just him. We just talked about BYU football and everything they accomplished in 2024. By all measurements, picked 13th out of 16 teams, the over-under win total of 4.5 wins to finish 11-2. And as I mentioned, I believe have the best vibes coming out of the postseason and having positioned themselves to being, I think, what is the best team in the Big 12 looking ahead to 2025. 2024 was special on that front. You look at other programs out there. We had down years by comparison for BYU women's volleyball and women's soccer in the fall season this past year than what they typically had done. Remember, Jennifer Rockwood has built an absolute leviathan with BYU women's soccer, and there were a lot of people thinking she was going into a rebuilding year in 2024. And if that's a rebuilding year where you still make the NCAA tournament, that's pretty darn good. That means the floor of your program is at a fairly high level. Same thing with Coach Olmstead in the women's volleyball program. They still made the NCAA tournament, but they didn't win in that tournament, just like women's soccer, but they still made it into that field. That's pretty impressive stuff. Now, we have a really good friend of the podcast, Bill Hecker, who tracks the Learfield Directors Cup standings, and what those are they are the overall athletic department rankings across all college sports. Programs like Stanford have routinely owned the Learfield standings just simply due to the depth and breadth of their athletic program. But BYU has competed very favorably, and Bill actually sent me an update talking about BYU and the Learfield Directors Cup standings and where things stand right now for BYU. As he mentions in his email to me, he says, to follow up on my previous email, the fall Learfield Directors Cup standing for everything but football have actually already come out. As shown below, BYU currently has 250 points, which is a 7th place in the Learfield out of all college athletic departments. He says this, however, after the football points are awarded and all those are below are certain except BYU and Penn State, BYU is likely to finish 4th coming out of the fall season across the Learfield standings. The teams in front of them would be Stanford, North Carolina, and Virginia. BYU's athletic department is in a very, very strong position right now. But what can they do in 2025? Well, obviously, you need to have a strong spring season. And spring has some sports out there that I think have an opportunity to really show that 2025 is where they turn a corner. I look most notably at the two programs that share a facility, and those are BYU baseball and BYU softball. Now, BYU softball didn't have necessarily a bad season last year, but they took a step up in competition. The Big 12 proved to be a pretty tough league when Oklahoma, who is the absolute leviathan, they were in the final year of the league and obviously ran roughshod through said league. Things will change a little bit now with BYU softball competing, I think, on a more level playing field, but still, softball is at a disadvantage being in a cold weather market, same as BYU baseball. There are a few social media accounts out there who have been begging for BYU to invest heavier in BYU baseball, and I can understand why. The BYU baseball program has got a very, very strong history. This is a program that's had College World Series appearances. They've got guys like Jack Morris, a Cy Young Award winner and MLB Hall of Famer, who have played for them. You think of some of the great BYU baseball players who have come through that program of eras past, and the current circumstance BYU baseball finds itself in is much like BYU football and basketball. They're playing in the toughest level that they've ever competed in, but I think BYU baseball has never been at a more of a disadvantage than they are right now. It's going to take added investment in BYU baseball to get them relevant on even a conference level. And I don't mean to come out and denigrate what BYU Athletics has done with BYU baseball, but they need more love and more investment. Is it going to take maybe a booster or two that's got a love for baseball to help lift the tide for the BYU baseball program in Trent Pratt? Maybe so, but I look at what BYU Athletics accomplished in 2024 and some of the surprise things that came out of that. Remember, I don't think it's any bigger than what BYU basketball did and their meteoric rise to relevancy on a national level. Can programs like that for BYU baseball, can they have that same type of growth in 2025? It may be too little too late to ask that, considering the BYU baseball season starts in just over a month's time. And I don't know what necessarily to expect right now, considering they just lost one of their assistant coaches. But I think that the athletic department at BYU is in a very strong position. And the goal for me going into the rest of this calendar year for BYU is to have that rising tide lifts all boats mentality impact some of the programs who may be at a disadvantage. And I look most notably at the stick and ball sports. I'm speaking of BYU baseball and BYU softball. I also look at swim and dive. They could use a little bit of an influx, I think, of overall investment in those programs. I think the tennis programs could use a little extra love, but I think the overall depth and breadth of BYU Athletics is in a very positive spot right now, but with added levels of increased competition at the Big 12 level, at the Power 4 level, it means you have to invest at a higher level, and also expectations need to go up a little bit more. I think BYU baseball would be very well served to be a competitive team, if not at a national level, at least at the conference level. Did they win just 7 games in the conference last year? It's not a good enough record. And you've got to see more from Trent Pratt and company. And like I said, it may take some boosters to help out BYU, maybe some NIL when it comes to baseball. But I think given the adequate time and just the work that is going to be needed to be put into that, I think BYU baseball could emerge from 2025 in a much better spot than it goes into this calendar year. I am interested to see where things stand there. But I think the overall tenor of what I'm trying to strike here is that 2024 signaled that BYU, they can compete at the Power 4 level. I remember when BYU joined the Big 12 conference, there were some people I was saying that, okay, maybe BYU competes in 1 or 2 sports on a national level, and the other ones are going to struggle. Well, I think 2024 proved to us, and what we learned during the last 365 days is that multiple sports can compete and win at national championships. And you have to obviously look directly at the cross-country programs. They were already nationally respected programs, but to win dual national titles in 2024, your second year in the Big 12 conference, that's pretty impressive stuff from Ed Eyestone and Diljit Taylor. And how can you take lessons learned from that, from what BYU football accomplished this past year, what BYU basketball is doing right now? How can you take those lessons and, like I said, invest and learn from those and help out other programs who are trying to make a similar type leap this coming year? So I hope I'm making sense, but what I'm trying to say here is that 2024 showed that BYU is a very, very good athletics department. But my hope is that 2025 proves to be that the proof is in the pudding of that. Is yes, there were multiple programs in 2024 who took a leap and absolutely showed that BYU can compete favorably at the level that they've aspired to be at for quite literally decades. That is the Power 4 level. Now, can the overall BYU athletics department show that other programs can make a similar type leap in 2025? That is my sincere hope, is that BYU athletics absolutely proves that. And I would love to see BYU baseball kind of be the banner of that. And it's not even have to be baseball. It could be one of the tennis programs. It could be men's volleyball finally getting back into the national conversation at their level, because that's a program that's got 3 national titles, but none of them have come in the last 20 years. So there's a lot to be proven in 2025 for BYU, but 2024 is a great springboard into 2025. And I've got my fingers crossed that 2025 proves to be another year of surprise, of growth, of just overall just impressions for BYU Athletics, that they can make impressions on a national level in multiple sports. I think the aspiration is that BYU Athletics, it becomes a force for good across all sports and not just football and not just men's basketball. Yes, those are the two chief revenue operators in the BYU Athletic Department, most notably BYU football. They bring in 85 to 90% of the overall total athletic revenue that BYU relies upon. But the other thing is that BYU wants to be that force for good in the world, and they can do that in multiple sports, and not just be one or two. It can be across the board. And I think 2024 showed us the kind of the springboard for that is there. Now, can you essentially leap from 2024 into 2025 and continue to show growth and, once again, just overall prowess across the BYU Athletic Department? That's my goal for 2025. I'd like to see BYU Athletics as a whole, because I appreciate everything that BYU stands for, and that includes every sport in the BYU Athletic Department. It's not just BYU football and BYU men's basketball. Yes, those are the two sports I spend the vast majority of the time talking about on this podcast, but there is an appreciation for everything else in the BYU Athletic Department, and I hope that Tom Homo, Brian Santiago, and the rest of the BYU Athletics brain trust out there, the coaches, the players, the other administrators, they're all involved. Hopefully they all can go out and take some inspiration from 2024 and parlay that into a strong 2025. And I'd love to look back on this a year from now and say, hey, I was right about that. I want to see more from BYU Athletics. I think there's still a lot more that they can get out than they're getting currently from BYU sports. All right, we'll finish up today's show by looking at some additions for BYU football, that one of which I think is more of a depth addition, but it shows the BYU's in a pretty advantageous spot right now to add some depth pieces, but also one, it flew under the radar. Nobody really knew about this until the bowl game, at least that I didn't know about it until the bowl game. How big of an impact could this young man have in 2025 for BYU football, and what could the overall impact be? We'll delve into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, in 2025, you may have sporting events. You've got your New Year's resolutions to go out to, whether it maybe is something like a baseball game. You want to go to a college football playoff game here as they finish up. The best part is attending any of those is available with our friends over at Game Time. Of course, attending the 12-team college football playoff is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. All of us think about the playoff and would have loved to have seen BYU in that circumstance. But if you want to get a chance to go out and make those new memories in the updated format and have those extra teams involved, you can do that with our friends over at Game Time. They have a brand new feature called Game Time Picks, which makes getting tickets for events even easier. Phil has all the fluff, showing the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets to find the right options for you guys. All of us want to get out to different events, and it doesn't have to be sporting events. Whether you want to go to theater, comedy, music, whatever you're into, Game Time has got the tickets for you guys, and they have a super deal in particular, which stands out as the best value for the event. All of us, you can see the seat views before buying your tickets, and knowing that the app shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So you don't have to worry about, what avalanche of fees is going to be tacked on to my total at the end of this. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee make me feel complete peace of mind when it comes to our friends at Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time, and download the Game Time app today. Create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDON College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, and it's all guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you guys are all doing well out there. All right, so BYU added another transfer portal addition yesterday, and it's one that maybe doesn't necessarily carry the same headlines for BYU, but I think it shows, going back to our original topic earlier on in today's podcast, that BYU football is in a pretty strong position right now. Max Alford announced he's committed to BYU yesterday on New Year's Day. He's a former Utah State Aggie, a former Park City Miner. If you pay attention to high school sports here in the state of Utah, he was a two-way player at the high school level, both a running back and a linebacker for Park City High School, and then went to Utah State, and in 2022 started 9 games and tallied an impressive 40 tackles. Well, you're okay. That's 2022, Jake. What has he done for us lately? Well, in 2023, the first game of the year, he suffered a season-ending knee injury and has played sparingly since then. In 2024, he garnered a grand total of 2 tackles. Now, Like I said, this may not be the headline grabbing addition via the transfer portal for BYU football. But the one thing I can say about Max Alford is, having watched him at the high school level, I think that Jay Hill understands what he can bring to the table if he's back to 100% health in 2025. That knee injury that he suffered, if I recall correctly, it was a knee injury. It was a really, really significant one, and it's taken him some time to get back on the field. Now, the other thing about this is, I look at the history of what Jay Hill has brought into BYU via the transfer portal, and I would say that if anybody Jay Hill brings in and he deems them a guy that he wants on his roster, who am I to argue with what Jay Hill has proven as BYU's defensive coordinator? Last time BYU brought in a guy via the transfer portal from Utah State at linebacker, it was Sione Moa. And what did Sione Moa prove to be? Now that he's back in the portal, which is crazy to consider, but he proved to be a very, very quality depth piece for BYU and was a fringe starter at one point during his time with the Cougars. That's the hope for a guy like Max Alford. Now, he's going to come to BYU as a preferred walk-on. He's not going to be on scholarship initially because they're still holding the 85 scholarship limit in 2025 this year, despite having 105 roster spots that could be full scholarship. It appears that the Big 12 is going to follow what the SEC is doing in limiting the scholarships, at least for this year. And Max Alford is going to come in and hopefully prove himself worthy of being a scholarship athlete down the road. He's got 3 years of eligibility on the table is what it appears to be. Having suffered that knee injury, he could petition for another year if he wanted to, just with essentially not having played for the vast majority of 2 full football seasons. But I look at this and say, okay, that's a pretty interesting addition for BYU. But if Jay Hill wants this guy in the program, who am I to argue? Because Jay Hill has proven to be a keen evaluator of talent. And if he believes in Max Alford, by golly, I better be believing in him as well. Now, the other person I want to talk about could also be a linebacker that could make an impact for BYU, but I think he could be a guy who also factors into the edge discussion for BYU. That's Naki Tuakoi. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it should. He was a member of the 2024 recruiting cycle for BYU. When he signed with the Cougars, he was a 4-star athlete, was rated 90 by our friends over at 24/7 Sports, and was a guy that I was very excited that BYU flipped from Stanford in the recruiting race to the end of the 2024 recruiting cycle. Well, as it stood, he went into the 2024 season not being enrolled at BYU, and there were so many questions about what his status was. Well, our good friend Mitch Harper, I guess I call him our good friend, but he's a good friend of mine. I've known him for 15 years now. He got a picture at the bowl game of a guy wearing a jersey saying Tuakoi on the back of it, and that's Naki Tuakoi. We found out shortly thereafter that he had actually gotten to BYU and was already working out with the team during their bowl preparation and was on the sideline for that Alamo Bowl. Getting a surprise 4-star talent to get enrolled at BYU and to be practicing with the team while flying under the radar, that doesn't happen very often with BYU. Trust me, we got BYU media and just very savvy fans crawling all over the place. And I'm actually a little bit floored that Naki Tuakoi enrolling and practicing with BYU was not reported before now. A guy of his caliber and what he brings to BYU is this is a kid that was considered to be an upper echelon linebacker in his recruiting class. And when you get a 4-star status or a 4-star designation from the recruiting services out there, they believe that you're going to be an early impact player in your college career. That's what BYU is hoping to get out of Naki Tuakoi here, is they hope that he comes in now going into 2025 and ends up being at least a 2-deep player at linebacker for BYU, but with his size as well. There's some question if he maybe outgrows playing linebacker and could end up a defensive end. They listed him at 6'3", 230 pounds coming out of high school, having played linebacker, defensive end, and running back for Fremont High School out there in the Bay Area. I look at this and say, man, what a late addition for BYU, but a welcome addition all at the same time. BYU is in need of continuing to add high-level talent, and there's nothing bigger than a 4-star talent out there. Because I remember when Naki flipped to BYU, and he was recruited by the likes of Stanford, Arizona State, Maryland, Cal, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Oregon, Tennessee, USC, Utah. Think about like kind of the who's who of college football. They all wanted this kid at one point in the recruiting cycle. And when he didn't enroll at BYU, I was one of those guys who was very quick to say, okay, he didn't get enrolled now. What are the real chances he ever enrolls at BYU? Well, there was massive question marks about that. But the fact that he's now enrolled with the Cougars, that means that he is finally at BYU, and now he can really start to hopefully emerge and show what he's capable of. there is still some question about Jack Kelly and if he's going to go pro. We don't know that as of recording of this podcast. If he were to exit the program, well, suddenly there's a void at that kind of, they call it, it's more of a pass rusher linebacker role, but it's a linebacker. A guy like Naki Tuakoi's got to be thinking, hey, that may be my spot for BYU. But if he bulks up a little bit, could he be a guy who ends up being a defensive end for BYU down the line? That's the nice part about this. There's versatility with him finally being at BYU, and there's God-given talent right there that you see it on film. You watch his high school tape. This is a kid who jumped off the page, and there's a reason why those teams I just mentioned, the who's who of college football, recruited him in hopes of garnering his signature. Well, BYU is the beneficiary of it in the end, and once again, Jay Hill's track record suggests anybody that he brings into BYU, they have got a lot to prove, but also they've got a lot of talent. And he has proven once again, speaking of Jay Hill, to put guys in the positions where they will succeed. I don't think you can argue with what BYU's defense proved this year under Jay Hill's direction. And quite frankly, he worked a miracle with a lot of the guys he had at his disposal. Now having four-star talents like Anaki Tuakoi enrolling here and then adding quality depth pieces that have proven production at the college level and a guy like Max Alford, BYU's in a very, very good spot right now. So I really like where things stand for the Cougars, and I'm hopeful that looking ahead to 2025 and beyond, that we see a BYU football program that continues to kind of just upgrade their overall talent base. And if they do that, this is a BYU team that's going to be a force, as I mentioned, once again, to be perched near the top, if not the top of the Big 12 Conference in 2025, and adding high-level talent like they have in the past 24 to 48 hours, and even beyond that, a few weeks back with Tuakoi having finally enrolled at BYU. They're in a really, really good spot right now, and that should be encouraging for Cougar fans looking ahead to the upcoming season. All right. That is going to do it for this Thursday edition of the show. So as always, thank you for all y'all's support. Appreciate everything you guys bring to the program, your comments, your love for the show, rating and reviewing it, sharing it with your family and friends, everything you guys do to help this show grow. It's all appreciated. We had a really, really strong 2024, and here's to an even better 2025. Coming up on tomorrow's show, expecting to catch up with Parker Ainsworth from Locked On Cougs. Now, that sounds familiar. Yes, it is the Houston Cougars. BYU is headed to Houston to take on Houston in basketball on Saturday afternoon. We'll preview that game. We'll also kind of get his take on where things stand. Does he believe that BYU should be the top dog going into the offseason for Big 12 football? We'll talk about all that and more with him tomorrow on the show. But once again, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And as always, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.